I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's March 30th, and we have a lot to talk about. And today, we're going to be talking a lot about progressive MS with two guests who each bring expertise in different aspects of progressive MS research and treatment. Dr. Daniel Onteneda from the Cleveland Clinic Neurological Institute's Mellen Center for Multiple Sclerosis will be joining me to talk about treating progressive MS, as well as new therapies that are on the horizon. And I'll also be talking with Dr. Kathy Zackowski, the Senior Director of Patient Management, Care, and Rehabilitation Research at the National MS Society, and a member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee. And we'll be discussing the Alliance's newly published paper stressing the importance of rehabilitation as a means of improving the well-being of people living with progressive MS, and calling for more research focused on this underemphasized aspect of progressive MS treatment. But before we get to my conversations with Dr. Kathy Zackowski and Dr. Daniel Onteneda, there are a few other things that you should know about. Weather forecasters use barometers to accurately measure the systems that create the weather. A rising barometer reading generally means good weather, and a falling barometer reading means stormy weather is on its way. Well, since 2008, the European MS platform has published the MS Barometer, which assesses access to care for the 1.2 million people living with MS in 35 European countries. The 2020 MS Barometer represents a collaboration between the European MS platform, the Health Policy Partnership, an independent research organization, and Quality Health, a health and social care survey specialist. And this report reveals gaps in MS care that cry out for improvement. I'll suggest that you review the MS Barometer 2020 report for yourselves. It's loaded with important information, and you'll find a link to the report in today's show notes. And if you've downloaded the Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android phone or tablet, well, you'll find that report under the bonus content tab. But I do want to share just a few of the top-line findings of this report with you. Of the 35 countries accounted for in this report, 20 of them don't consult with people living with MS or MS patient organizations in developing health policies that affect people with MS. And 24 countries don't have a neurological or chronic disease policy that even includes multiple sclerosis. In 2018, just 57% of the people in these 35 countries received MS disease-modifying therapies. Treatment rates were very high in some countries like Switzerland, where 90% of the people with MS received DMTs, while other countries like Serbia only provided disease-modifying therapies to 10% of the people living with MS. And although Ocrevus received approval for treating primary progressive in the EU in January of 2018, 74% of the people living with progressive MS were not given access to any disease-modifying therapies that year. Only 48% of the people surveyed had access to physical rehabilitation, and access was even lower for psychological, cognitive, and occupational rehabilitation. I think it goes without saying that we have to do better, and I'm hoping that the European MS platform's MS Barometer 2020 report will serve as a springboard for advocacy that leads to improvement, because I know that collectively, our voices have power. Over the past year, the International Progressive MS Alliance convened a working group to explore the progressive MS rehabilitation landscape. That group has been led by my first guest, MS rehabilitation expert, Dr. Kathy Zackowski. And the group has just published a paper titled Prioritizing Progressive MS Rehabilitation Research, a call from the International Progressive MS Alliance. Dr. Zackowski is joining me to talk about this paper that emphasizes the need for more research that's focused on rehabilitation for people living with progressive MS. And we'll also be discussing the evidence-based benefits of rehabilitation for people with progressive MS. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Kathy Zackowski. Dr. Kathy Zackowski is a Senior Director of Patient Management Care and Rehabilitation Research at the National MS Society. And Dr. Zackowski is also a member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, where she's served as the co-chair of a working group that's focused on identifying specific priorities to inform rehabilitation research in progressive MS. Full disclosure, it's been my honor to be a member of that working group, and the result of our work has been summarized in a paper that was published just a few weeks ago. The paper is titled Prioritizing Progressive MS Rehabilitation Research, a call from the International Progressive MS Alliance. And Dr. Zackowski is joining me today to talk about that paper. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Zackowski.
Hi, thanks for asking me. I'm glad to be back.
I'm sure that when some people think about the Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, they might think about research designed to identify a biomarker for progressive MS or discover a new disease-modifying therapy for progressive MS. But they may not always think about rehabilitation. Why is rehabilitation one of the Scientific Steering Committee's priority areas?
The Alliance has three priorities, and one of them is enhancing well-being. And that's in part because the Alliance knows that in order to improve wellness or well-being of a person, we need hypothesis-driven research. And that research needs to be related to a person's experience. So rehabilitation really speaks to that in-person experience of sort of a tangible starting point to how we can improve someone's quality of life. So of the three priority areas, enhanced well-being really is meant to incorporate symptom management and rehabilitation.
Our working group represented quite a cross-section of expertise. Can you talk a little bit about the makeup of our group?
Yeah, it was a large group. So we had 21 authors on this paper, and it wasn't an accident. That was completely intentional. We made a point of including experts from around the world. So we had experts from Australia, Italy, Denmark, Germany, France, the United States, Canada, the UK. We tried to cover as broad a territory as we could. We also included people affected by MS. We had people who were in industry, and we had academics who were scientific and or clinical experts in MS. And we were careful to select individuals whose research really spanned the spectrum, the spectrum of studies from, basic mechanisms that would affect a person's quality of life across that spectrum to studies of outcome measures, clinical trials, and through to studies of implementation, kind of behavioral interventions that you might think about when you think of rehabilitation. We also know that enhancing well-being requires progress in all of these areas. So we wanted to make sure we had expertise in all of these areas represented from the authors. So the work was truly a collaboration. I will say there were individual subgroups that worked separately for a few weeks, but then we would always come together and share all of the knowledge we'd acquired to come up with this single paper.
Well, let's get into our paper itself. The title of the paper, as I said, is Prioritizing Progressive MS Rehabilitation Research, a call from the International Progressive MS Alliance. Why did the Alliance feel the necessity of issuing this call to action?
I feel like I need to give you a little rationale to sort of lead up to my real answer. So bear with me because I think you might know all of this information. There are a growing number of disease-modifying therapies that treat relapsing-remitting MS and active secondary progressive MS, but there's really only one approved for primary progressive MS. So this means that people with progressive MS have very few treatment options. And the clinical consequences of progressive MS are also varied and cumulative, right? So they range from very mild sensory changes or visual changes to more profound cognitive and motor impairments. And we also know that in addition to these individual effects from the disease, progressive MS has these far-reaching implications that include job loss, stress to family, and financial strain, just to name a couple. Yet the weight of evidence focused on symptom management comes overwhelmingly from studies predominantly or solely involving people with relapsing-remitting MS. So this lack of studies among people with progressive MS creates an immediate challenge for clinicians and researchers in the field to evaluate symptomatic treatment, and it leaves them with very few options in treating progressive MS. So way back in 2018, the Alliance convened a scientific congress in Toronto, and that was focused on symptom management and rehabilitation in progressive MS. At this meeting, there were scientists, industry members, and people affected by MS, and they met to share evidence supporting rehabilitation in progressive MS. And from this meeting, we found that the existing evidence was really broad, but lacked sufficient depth and quality to meet the needs of people with progressive MS. I mean, there's cognitive rehab, there's different kinds of exercise, there's motor relearning. We heard about brain stimulation. We heard about fatigue interventions. But how do you tailor those things to progressive MS was a completely unanswered question. So we need faster and more efficient progress in the field. And one last little caveat is that a challenge of rehabilitation is its complexity. So it requires the appropriate expert to provide the intervention, but also the persistent effort from the person who's receiving it and working on it. So that combination makes it difficult, and much more difficult than taking a medication or receiving a drug. So this urgent call to action really was intended to target research efforts that are aimed at optimizing rehabilitation and improving quality of life for individuals with progressive MS.
To that end, I'm sure that there are some people living with progressive MS who might feel that their level of physical disability places them beyond rehabilitation. Is there evidence that rehabilitation can help to create better outcomes among people living with progressive MS?
Yes, so there is evidence that no matter what level of disability or a level of abilities you have, there are interventions that can help put you on the path to getting stronger and to learning how to adapt to the symptoms that you have. So we know, for example, that there are stimulating devices that you can use for your leg. So one common problem is that people drag their foot when they take a step forward. So one thing that companies have now devised based on research is that you can stimulate one muscle in your calf that can help you lift your toe at the right time when you take a step. So for someone who has this could make a person unable to walk if they're constantly dragging their toe, dragging their foot as they walk. So that's one example of a device that was designed essentially to allow someone to continue walking longer. You know, one of the symptoms that we focused on was upper limb function. And I will tell you in part that was because in progressive MS, we know that mobility may become too difficult. And yet the upper limbs or the arms are required to be able to use the canes or the walkers to allow you to stay mobile, or just to be able to do common everyday things like feed yourself and get dressed. So we wanted to make sure that this paper incorporated rehabilitation options for everyone at every level. But I will tell you there is evidence that people with a high level of disability can get some improvement by going to a specialist that's trained in rehabilitation and neurologic rehabilitation in MS.
Our paper focuses on 4 specific symptom areas in progressive MS. You just talked about mobility and upper extremity impairment. There was also fatigue, pain, and cognitive impairment. Tell us how these 4 symptom areas were chosen as the ones to focus on.
Yes, so you can imagine that with 21 authors and the Alliance all listening in to make sure that this paper and this topic was, dealt with appropriately, it was very hard to come to an agreement on these 4 symptoms. There are a wide variety of symptoms. And so we decided that the best route was really to listen to what people affected by MS are saying. So we looked at the results of 4 different surveys from different parts of the world, and looked at the symptoms that people reported were their primary or a primary problem symptom. And that's really how we broke it down to 4. I will tell you that we were trying to get to 3, and we just really had to include a 4th one. So I think the list is very large, and this paper was not intended to say these are the only and these are the priority symptoms. This paper is really intended to say these are 4 important symptoms that we know are important to people with progressive MS, but we also know there are plenty of others that we need to get to work and try to understand and be able to treat.
Well, as someone who served as a caregiver for someone else who was living with progressive MS for a little more than 20 years, I can attest to the fact that the symptoms that happen to be chosen are ones for which there are not simple workarounds. Fatigue does not have a great set of treatment options. Pain, cognitive impairment, all of these things not only don't have necessarily great treatment options, but they're the symptoms that kind of stop you and put you on the sideline of your own life. While other symptoms are bothersome, can certainly get in the way and create obstacles, a lot of symptoms have at least some level of defined symptom management that can aid you in living with those symptoms. But when it comes to things like fatigue and pain, the upper extremity impairment that you mentioned, these things get in the way of everyday life. So from a non-scientific and highly anecdotal point of view, I can only add that I would not have chosen a different set of symptoms at all to look at. I'll be sure to include a link in today's show notes for those of our listeners who might want to review the paper. And now that it's been published, Kathy, what's next?
I knew that was going to come up. So we're excited. So the idea with this paper was, again, as a starting point. If you read the papers, there's a table, and this table has a list of what we're calling key research questions, and we're really emphasizing that within these 4 symptom areas, there are 3 key questions that the authors of this paper really thought were the next steps. So I will tell you, I don't have the exact answer of what our next step is, but I think we will be taking it from this paper, and from those key research questions, we'll be leading with our next step.
Well, Dr. Kathy Zackowski, thank you for all that you do to improve the quality of life for people living with MS, and thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me, and I'd like to get invited back once we have our next steps delineated.
You can count on that.
Thank you.
Fatigue is a symptom of MS that not only affects up to 80% of the people living with MS, but just over half the people living with MS identify fatigue as the MS symptom that most interferes with everyday life. And while there aren't any therapies that have been shown to do a very good job of managing fatigue, the results of a study from Denmark suggest that making lifestyle changes can make a real difference when it comes to getting a handle on MS fatigue. The study was based on a secondary analysis of a randomized control trial of multidisciplinary MS rehabilitation in Denmark, and the study included just over 400 people between the ages of 18 and 65 who were living with MS. The research team's analysis concluded that increasing physical activity and quitting smoking measurably lessened fatigue among the study participants. So the good news here is that while you may be waiting for a pharmacological treatment for fatigue, you can take steps today to lessen the impact of MS fatigue on your everyday life. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. Most research studies come from ideas proposed by researchers. But as someone affected by MS, you probably have questions too. Questions about symptoms, progression, treatment. Well, what if your questions could drive MS research? That's the premise of Our Questions Have Power, a new program that invites you to share MS-related questions and topics you think should be studied, and to vote and comment on questions submitted by others. Our Questions Have Power is hosted by iConquer-MS, the people-powered MS research network. And iConquer-MS will share the high-priority questions as voted on by you with researchers, healthcare professionals, advocates, and funders with the goal of launching research studies to answer those questions. The initial focus of the program is COVID-19 and its impact on people with MS. This is your opportunity to propose research that will explore how COVID-19 has affected you, your family, and your community. It's easy to participate. Just create a free account at iconquerms.org, and I'll include that link in today's show notes, and then share your questions. I've already posted my question on this topic, and I hope you'll join me and post yours. Now people affected by MS have the power to impact the MS research agenda, and that's something that we should all be taking advantage of. About 80% of the people with relapsing-remitting MS are eventually diagnosed with secondary progressive MS, and at that point, the remissions stop and MS symptoms just continue to worsen. And then there are the roughly 15% of the people diagnosed with MS who are diagnosed from the beginning with primary progressive MS. So identifying ways to optimally treat progressive MS is a priority. Joining me today to give us an update about progressive MS treatment and research is Dr. Daniel Onteneda, an associate professor of neurology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University, and a staff member at the Cleveland Clinic Neurological Institute's Mellen Center for Multiple Sclerosis. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Daniel Onteneda. We're talking about progressive MS with my guest, Dr. Daniel Onteneda. Dr. Ontaneda is an associate professor of neurology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University and a staff member at the Cleveland Clinic Neurological Institute's Mellen Center for Multiple Sclerosis. He's also a member of the Executive Steering Committee for the North American Imaging in Multiple Sclerosis Cooperative and a member of the Multiple Sclerosis Functional Composite Task Force. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Onteneda.
Thanks so much, John, for the invitation, and really happy to be here.
Whether we're talking about MS or really most anything else, I've always found that being clear on our definitions goes a long way toward making information easier to understand. So I'd like to start our conversation by having you define some terms for us. When we talk about progressive MS, we could be referring to primary progressive or secondary progressive MS. Could you explain what those MS subtypes are and how they differ?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think I agree with starting out with definitions. And, the differences between the different types of MS, I'd start off by saying that, these categories of disease are things that we've come up with, as neurologists and sometimes as scientists. And they don't necessarily reflect perfectly what each patient is. But to answer your question, when we talk about primary progressive MS, what we're talking about are patients who accumulate disability in an insidious onset, gradually over time, in a kind of a very progressive fashion. And typically, that contrasts with what we call relapsing-remitting MS, where people start out with attacks. Now, the people with relapsing-remitting MS represent about 90% of the population. The people with primary progressive MS represent more like 10% of the population. So they're, primary progressive is much less common. Now, when we talk about secondary progressive MS, we're talking about a secondary process. So of those 90% of people that start out with relapsing-remitting MS, after having MS for 10 to 15 to 20 years, they start developing that same gradual, insidious accumulation of disability over time. And that's what we call secondary progressive MS. Why do we call it secondary? Because it comes after an initial period of relapsing-remitting versus primary starts progressive from the very beginning.
Over the past couple of years, the FDA has used language in their approval of some disease-modifying therapies that some people living with progressive MS have found confusing. Can you explain what's meant by active progressive MS and inactive progressive MS?
Yeah, a great question once again. So, what we know is that progressive MS isn't an all or nothing, right? And I kind of described that at the beginning, that these kind of boxes are boxes we put people in, and we know that there's some variability. So there's two kind of components in MS. One we think is kind of neurodegeneration and progression, which is that slow worsening that happens primarily from the get-go in primary progressive MS, and then in secondary progressive MS occurs after an initial bout of relapsing-remitting. But what we realized is that there were patients with primary progressive MS who did have what we consider disease activity. And disease activity is presence of new attacks, presence of brain lesions that are new, or presence of enhancing lesions, which indicate active inflammation. And so historically, the FDA had kind of separated progressive MS and relapsing MS out. And what we realized is that, if a person is accumulating new brain lesions, or if they're having relapses, the disease-modifying medications that are approved for relapsing MS are probably going to be helpful to take care of those relapses and to take care of those attacks. So the FDA took a big turn, and they basically said that going forward, all the therapies approved for MS actually can be approved not only for relapsing MS, but also progressive MS as long as it's active. And active is defined as presence of attacks, presence of new lesions on brain MRI, or presence of gadolinium-enhancing or contrast-enhancing lesions.
Final definitions now. Is there a difference between progressing MS and progressive MS?
Yeah. So, I think what we think about is, the term progressing indicates that there's an active component to a patient who is actually undergoing progression at that time. And progressive MS, for me at least, describes more kind of an overall phenomenon within, a disease course. So you might say that a patient has progressive MS and they're not actively progressing, or they're not progressing. That means they're standstill, right? So they're not actively worsening. They're basically, stable. Now that patient could start progressing and they might start worsening. And so that's kind of more of a descriptive term, I would say, to say, well, what's happening with the patient right now? In terms of kind of our disease classifications, we prefer to stick to, relapsing, progressive, call it with activity, without activity. And when a person has progressive MS, we try to indicate if they are having progression or if they're not having active progression.
Depression is a common symptom among people living with MS, including people living with primary progressive MS. And I'm wondering whether depression among people with progressive MS is an actual symptom of MS itself, or do people with progressive MS develop depression because they're living with a more aggressive form of MS?
Yeah, great question. And I think that there's probably a combination of both to get to your question. I think on the one side, what we know is that MS patients, when you account for how much disability they have, we've compared them with patients who have an equal amount of disability due to other conditions. And it turns out that those people who have the same amount of disability as a given MS patient might have less depression. So we think depression is part of what MS is. Symptoms of depression are probably caused by the pathology of MS in the brain. And we think it's an embedded part of what MS means. Irrespective of that, I think that, certainly a person who's having a hard time with symptoms of MS is also more likely to become depressed. So I think it's a combination of factors. But what I try to remind patients all the time is that depression is part of your MS. Don't beat yourself up because you're feeling depressed with MS, because that's part of the disease itself. There's really, don't blame yourself. It's not something that you're doing. We have to be proactive about treating it, identifying it, treating it early, treating it aggressively, so that your quality of life can improve. And it's like any other symptom of MS. It's like numbness, tingling, or fatigue. And that's how we approach it at the Mellen Center.
Well, what might a comprehensive treatment plan for someone living with primary progressive MS look like?
Yeah, so I think what I try to do with my patients is put together a plan that, involves, two main facets or aspects. I think on the one side, what we try to do is determine, what the disease modifying treatment is that we're supposed to be using. These are the medications that are FDA approved for MS. In many progressive MS patients, we use a variety of these medications. We try to determine what the right medication is for each patient, put them on it, and make sure we're monitoring to make sure that it's working correctly and also that it's safe. On the other hand, I think the other large pillar is something we call symptomatic treatment. And this is treatment of what the progressive MS has produced and trying to improve your quality of life. And that includes everything from, medication, lifestyle change, modification to improve your quality of life, working with other practitioners, including physical therapy, rehab, urology, psychiatry, psychology, speech, occupational, and physical therapy to make sure we take care of your symptoms, any medication that patients might need. And typically what we do is we reassess what the goals of that treatment is. So we typically see patients every 6 months. We sit down, we say, how are we doing with the disease-modifying medication? Is it working? Is it safe? How are we doing with the symptom control? Let's prioritize what the symptoms are that we want to treat. And we reassess that continuously to make sure that, we're getting where patients need to be in terms of their treatment options.
And what medications are available today to treat primary progressive MS?
Yeah, so quite in contraposition to what we have for relapsing MS, where we have many, many medications. For progressive MS, for primary progressive MS, we have one approved disease-modifying medication, and that's a medication called ocrelizumab. It's in the family of what we consider anti-B cell therapies. And these medications, when given to patients in clinical trials, demonstrated that their accumulation of disability was actually slower on the medication than in the comparison group, which was a placebo group. Ocrelizumab is a medication that we use. It's probably the most frequent medication that we use in progressive MS patients. But I always try to remind people that it's a little bit hard to know if the medication's working because it's not like in relapsing MS where we say, we're going to start a medication, we're going to stop relapses, we're going to stop attacks, we're going to stop new lesions, and that's the goal, and it's very clear. In progressive MS, it's harder because the medication basically slows disability accumulation. So patients who are taking the medication on a day-to-day basis might not even feel that the medication is working. I'll reiterate an example that I always give my patients, which is, I'm taking this medication, how do I know it's working, doc? And what I tell them is, we'll take, for example, John, if you had MS, we would take you and we'd say, let's clone John. We'll give one John medication and the other John, we won't give medication. And then we'll look at you guys 5 years down the road. And what we think is that the John that took medication will look a whole lot better, less disabled than the John who didn't take the medication. Now, if you ask John on any given day, does he feel better on the medication? He might say, no, not really. But really what we care about is where you are, years from now.
Are there new therapies aimed at stopping progression that you see on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of medications that are on the horizon that I think are very promising. And I think one of the medications that I would like to highlight is a medication that's a repurposed medication. And that means it's a medication that's used for something else previously, but now we're using to treat progressive MS. And that medication is a medication called simvastatin. It's an anti-cholesterol medication. It was studied in a phase 2 trial, which is a trial which looks at an MRI outcome. In this case, it looked at brain volume, and it showed really positive effects. So it reduced shrinking of the brain. And now there's a very large study that is studying simvastatin, which is called the MSSTAT2 trial, which is partially funded by the National MS Society, which is actually looking to see if this medication has an effect on disability. I think it's very promising. And then the other group of medications that are very exciting and have really developed over the last several years, and we expect clinical trials to report out over the next 2 to 3 years, are a group of medication called tyrosine kinase inhibitors. These are medications that are actually acting in a pathway that we haven't used in the past. There already is phase 2 data. There are some preliminary reports of clinical improvement in these patients. It's acting completely via a different pathway, also probably through B cells. And we think that's an exciting new prospect for patients. And then finally, I'd like to remind people that perhaps where we're working most in early phase 1 and phase 2 trials, and these are a little far away from getting to the clinic, are therapies that promote remyelination and promote repair. And so the goal there is to kind of improve function, not just delay function, but actually, make people better.
The International Progressive MS Alliance represents a first-of-its-kind global response to progressive MS. The alliance has catalyzed MS organizations, leading researchers, and people affected by progressive MS from around the world to address the challenges of progressive MS through a coordinated, collaborative approach to research. As a member of the Alliance's Scientific Steering Committee for the past 5 years, I often talk about the work that the Alliance is involved in. I'm hoping you can share your perspective on how the Alliance is fueling research on progressive MS and tell us how people can get involved.
I have to applaud definitely the work that the Progressive MS Alliance has done over the last several years. And, we realized that our big gap in treatment for our MS patients was that we really don't have as much to offer to our primary progressive patients and our secondary progressive MS patients. So, I think this collaborative of, foundations, institutions, investigators, and patients all over the world really is doing important work. And the work is kind of divided. I think on the one end, what the Progressive MS Alliance is doing is that it's funding research that is trying to help us better understand what are the mechanisms of injury in MS, in progressive MS. So what's underlying that worsening? Because that's something that we don't know completely yet. And so kind of understanding how progressive MS works, understanding how we can screen for medications early is important. How can we identify pathways that we can then develop drugs for? I think that's where kind of a bulk of the research has to be done. We understand the disease better, and therefore we'll create better therapies for it. I think the second aim is try to improve our design and our conduct of clinical trials. So clinical trials are how we get medications from the lab into patients' hands to help them. And I think that, we know how to do trials in relapsing MS quite well. In progressive MS, we don't know as well how to do it. We don't know how to measure progressive MS as well. We don't know how to select patients as well for clinical trials. And then finally, we need to develop trials that are a little bit more efficient. So, running a 3-year study with, thousands of patients to get a negative result is quite frustrating. So we would like a way to try to screen medications early on so we can do small, short trials and then only pick the medications that are most likely to be successful going forward. And then I think one of the final things that the Progressive MS Alliance is doing is trying to improve the experience that patients with MS have on a day-to-day basis and the research around that. I think historically we've devoted a lot of our research focus to developing treatments and thinking about how the disease works. And we haven't really had as much of an emphasis on, well, how do we just make symptoms better? How do we make the day-to-day lives of MS patients, specifically progressive MS patients, better? So I think there's a lot that can be done. I'd encourage, individuals with MS and with progressive MS specifically to talk to their neurology team about how they can get involved in research. I would visit the Progressive MS Alliance website. It's progressivemsalliance.org, and I'm sure we can share that link and sign up, become a member, become a partner in what we're doing to try to help people with progressive MS.
We will definitely share that link in today's show notes. Dr. Daniel Onteneda, I want to thank you for all that you do to improve the lives of people living with MS, and thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks also to you and all you do with the education to patients. I think this is invaluable, and I've heard from so many patients about how they love it. So keep up the good work.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends and family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/187. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or text. Just a quick reminder that if you haven't yet taken our first ever Real Talk MS listener survey, you still have time. Completing the survey will take you less than 7 minutes, but it will allow me to learn a lot more about the Real Talk MS listener community, and you'll be entered into a drawing for a $100 Amazon gift card. You'll find that survey at realtalkms.com/survey. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.